from Wadsworth, Illinois, joining us from Wadsworth, Illinois. Not from there originally. I'm originally from Philadelphia, if you must know. But let's see. And I'm here with Judith, Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro. We'll introduce
Hi, everyone.
A little later. But as you come in, while we're waiting, it's 11:57 now, so we have about 3 minutes until we're going to get started. So if you would come in and go to the chat and open up where it says 2, pick the second in the drop-down menu, so panelists and attendees, so everybody can see, and say hi, like Anna did. Hi, Anna. Hi, Sandra. Haven't seen you for a while. Sandra, you got to do the panelists and attendees, so everybody can see that you're here. Welcome. Welcome, Sandra. Welcome, Anna. Who else is here with us today? Hi, May from Akron. Welcome. And Joy from Kalamazoo.
Wow, I love that everyone's from such different places.
And Fabiola, where is the Family Advocacy Center? Is that in Illinois? Spanish Community Center, Family Advocacy? Is that in Illinois or is that in a different state? Kankakee and Kalamazoo. We have like a big debt to the native peoples. Who else is here? Going to get started in about 30 seconds. Hi, Veronica from Mississippi.
Oh, from Halifax, Canada.
And Jeanette from Halifax. And we got Ashley from Mississippi. Please, everybody, make sure, I'm going to say it one more time. I know you're like bored of me saying it, but everybody's going like, where's Ashley? Where's Janan? Where is, and that's because you need to check the drop-down menu, panelists and attendees, so that everybody can see, not just the panelists. And we're going to get started in like 30 seconds. Good to have you back, Sandra.
Hi, Sandra.
Michelle Hollier is back. Hi, Western New York. And I'm here with Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro, and our topic is navigating grief and loss. And that's our topic for the whole week. And those of you who are receiving Be Strong Families emails, which is probably everybody, you'll notice that we have a new resource, which is called Grief Compass, Navigating Trauma and Loss. And we assembled an amazing small group of experts with both lived experience and also professional experience with grief. And last week, Ahmed Abujradeh was our guest, and they were one of the architects. And Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro was also one of the architects in that small group. Really, really helpful perspective. And Judith has also been here earlier. She was here doing a whole series of grief at the beginning of the pandemic and taught yoga class at the beginning of the pandemic. So she's been our friend for a while. And I love saying doctor because in the time between when she started and we were in the same PhD program together, Judith has finished and she is now Dr. Judith Ehrman-Shapiro. She was the first one of our cohort who finished. And she's an inspiration to all of us. Hi, Tammy, Yolanda, Becky. Good to see you all. So let's go to the next slide before Judith gets started, or Dr. Ehrman-Shapiro gets started, and remind you about the ways to engage. And this is an extremely exciting webinar series, at least today, because we do not have slides. So I asked Judith if she would treat this more like if she was in her role as a therapist and she was having a group, or she was having then as an academic, like going through the basics of grief, because her other webinar on trauma and then reframing trauma, and then she's done a lot of PowerPoints on both the grief and then trauma series. So if you want to know about that stuff, it's available on our website. But this time I thought it would be really wonderful for her to engage with us as a group, to be able to just be who she is and do what she does. So with that, she decided not to have any anchoring PowerPoint slides, which just means, why am I bringing this up on the ways to engage? I'm bringing it up on the ways to engage slide because your participation is going to be critical to having this go. I mean, otherwise it's going to be Judith and me having our conversation, which we can keep it going and fill the space. But you are cordially invited, and you can use the chat. Of course, you can always use the chat, but also this time raising your hand and actually being able to speak. Andrew, who is here from Minnesota, providing the excellent tech support, he will unmute you, then you'll unmute yourself and you'll be able to talk. But this is why this ways to engage is so important. It's why I'm telling people, be sure you press to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see what you're saying. And be sure and raise your hand if you want to talk, if you have something to say. And then just in recognition that we want this to be a safe space and we co-create the safe space together, we have agreements, Be Strong Families, for all of anything we do. So if you can agree to these agreements, that you'll speak from your own experience, that you'll treat people the way you want to be treated, that you'll just be here now. If you need a minute, take a minute. But when you're here, be here. If you agree, do like everybody's doing. Tammy, hi Tammy. Hi Michelle, hi Dana, Melissa, Juliana, Chris. Oh wow, we got a great group today. We got a great group. I recognize a lot of names and there's some new names for me. So that's fabulous as well. So without further, Judith, it's all yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. So not to worry about any silences that take place during this hour together. Silence is a beautiful thing. It's time for us all to reflect, to become a little more introspective, to let things kind of settle within us. But it is a great gift, and I mean it quite wholeheartedly, when you're willing to share from your experience with the rest of the group. So we're encouraging that to happen. The way this is going to be structured, I was teasing Kathy a little bit, is we're going to do almost like the game show of navigating grief and loss today. I have 4 topics that I'd like us all to talk about or toss around about. So about every 10 minutes, you're going to hear chimes. You're going to hear a little bell, which just tells me that if it's meaningful, I'm going to move the conversation on a little bit. But before we start, so today's topic anyway is, what is grief? And you know, I was sitting here thinking to myself, Kathy, that, you know, I am 57 years old. I have experienced a tremendous amount of loss and grief by this time in my life, both traumatic and otherwise. And it's still such a meaningful question. And I think part of the reason for that is that it's not obvious, that we get told what grief is, we experience grief in another way. It gets confusing. So it's always meaningful to have a definition specific to our community, meaning this group, in the next 4 days. And I hope you will come back for the rest of the conversation as we go on. Today, we're going to define what is grief for this group at this time. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about styles of grieving. So something we know from the research now is that we don't all grieve the same way, and that there's actually something called styles of grieving, which helps to address biases that have been taught to us in the past, conditioning, not only with regards to our gender, but in other ways. Then we're going to be talking about grief and self-care. And then finally, we're going to be talking about watching other people grieve, which can be an issue all unto itself. So I told Kathy that before we started today, I really wanted to help ground us in a little bit of movement. Here we are on my beautiful sun porch. I live in a log cabin. This is the real thing, my friends. And I thought that wherever you're coming from in your day, A lot of times we're working in our mind cognitively. Maybe we're working sitting or with our hands, and our body kind of gets cut out. And it's so good to just breathe and stretch a little bit. So I'm going to do a short exercise that I call the 6 movements of the spine. It's really just a range of motion exercise. I do it before my yoga classes, and I do it when I get up in the morning, and it's wonderful. So whether you are seated in a chair or standing, the first thing we're going to do is take a roll down. So bringing your head to your chest and just letting your head sit there for a moment. Allow the muscles, if you can, at the back of your neck to stretch out, and maybe just take a full set of breath right here. As you exhale, begin to roll down your spine a little bit. And you don't have to go very far, but you can go all the way from standing over if that's something that's meaningful to you, or sitting in your chair, just dangling your body over your knees. And let your body, this is called flexion, be in flexion for a moment, stretching our lower back and the top of our hips and stretching our whole spine. In here, in this forward fold, we're also going to just take a full set of breath. So a deep breath in and an exhale. And then we're going to feel your belly button to your spine, feel the bottom of the spine, and begin to roll up. And see if you can raise your head last. So it's the unfurling of the spine. We do this natural thing that I call defensive, which is we go like this. Okay. We bring ourselves up through our head, and that's so that we can see everything around us. So once you're back up to neutral, just take your shoulders for a moment, squeeze them up towards your ears, and drop them on an exhale. And we're just going to do that one more time. Squeeze them up and let them go. And then we're going to start arching the spine. So even just sitting in your chair, you can put your hands on your back if you want, and just begin to look at the ceiling, dropping your shoulders back, extending the spine. It's so good to do this for your spine. If you're standing, you can do it right like this, just supporting your back. And then slowly again, belly button to spine, bringing your body back upright. So we've done 2 movements of the spine. We're going to take a twist. So bringing your right hand over to your left knee, so you can do it this way if you're standing. We're going to twist and look over the left shoulder. If you want, you can pick up your hand behind you, but you don't have to. Just inviting the body, just releasing that, going to the other side for a little bit of a twist. And then exhale, let's do that again. Twisting one direction and twisting the other direction. And then, whether you're seated or standing, we're just going to start creeping the arm down the same side leg for a little lateral stretch. Now, this is up to you. You can put the other arm up to emphasize that stretch if you want, or just lean to one side. On your inhale, bring your body back up and come right over to the other side. So this movement is called lateral flexion. And then just for a moment, sitting right back in neutral, we came forward and back. We twisted left and right, and we pulled the body open through the sides, side to side. So sitting just as you are, taking a deep breath in. And on an exhale, just let yourself sink into the surface where you're sitting, where you're standing. And then we'll get ready for our conversation on grief. So the first topic, or the first way, I'm starting my timer, that we want to direct the conversation is that grief, loss that you experience, is it only sad feelings and depression, or is it more than that? What have you experienced emotionally after experiencing loss? So different ways to contribute to this conversation are by just typing in the chat or by raising your hand. However you want to contribute.
Well, I can get the conversation going a little bit, Judith, because what I initially thought of, and this is in the initial stage of, like hearing of a loss, I know that like there's a body component of it, which isn't about sad feelings at all. It's like being punched in the gut, or being punched in the stomach. And I literally fell to the ground. Like when I heard that, like my rabbi, who I was very close to, I remember just feeling like I'd been punched. My grandmother too, when that happened. We've got, Peter says more laughter and joy when remembering the person, time shared in memories. Joy says needing more sleep. Kara says lonely, tired. Melissa says anxiety, overwhelmed. So in addition to sadness, we've got anxiety, overwhelm, sleeping my way through it. Yeah, I've had that one too, just feeling exhausted, disappointed. Tandra says wanting to be close to other people I love. So, valuing, and I don't know what I get that too. It's like when I've lost somebody, wanting to be with somebody else even more. Nothing matters anymore. Michelle, nothing matters anymore. May says feeling sad. Joy says making intentional choices that keep me busy. Kara says angry, mad.
Yeah, just look at how dynamic what you're sharing is. Lonely, lost, empty, everything from joy in remembrance. And I really appreciate that answer, all the way to feeling like aggravated, aggressive, angry, don't want to accept it. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly have experienced that as well.
And Tammy's crazy roller coaster of emotions. Janan says feeling life is finished. Yolanda says feeling tired, sad, looking at the past. Connie says shock, disbelief, pain. And yeah. So I'll know all of that at some time or another.
And I really appreciated what you said, Kathy, about it's not just feeling emotionally or abstractly, it's also this really intense physical experience. Like I noticed that some people were talking about being exhausted, like the utter overwhelm and exhaustion, like you've been used up. That kind of quality that also happens as well, which is in the body.
Yeah, and I've also, somebody told me this once and it really stuck with me, that it's like it ebbs and flows, it's like being at the ocean and getting hit by a wave and you're ground into the sand. There are times that you just feel like I'm being ground into the sand, and then it abates a little bit and I feel relatively normal for a little while, but then it's not over. It's not like it comes again, and so I guess there's also that ebb and flow of the feelings.
So in the research, we call that oscillation, which is just ebb and flow, waves. And they say that happens to us because our brains can't take the constant pounding from grief or loss. So what happens in your brain is your brain just kind of slowly tunes it out, like you can't focus on it anymore. And that's a natural process so that you can survive, honestly. Some people feel guilty about the waves, Kathy.
Oh, really?
So we feel guilty that we have a good day. Yes, yeah, that, know that we have a good day, so we're going along and we're kind of mourning, we feel very heavy. And then all of a sudden we're smiling and laughing, but that doesn't feel right either. So then we go back into the process. So that's such a real experience that we have as people in grief, is that it comes and goes, and it has to happen so that we can tolerate it.
And I know this is probably something that we'll talk about tomorrow with styles of grieving, but I was having this text conversation with one of my friends whose daughter's going through something. And she said she's regressed to being like a 3-year-old. I said, what do you mean she's regressed to being like a 3-year-old? She said, well, we all, when we are going through rough times, we can isolate and reject other people. And I'm like, I don't think that's regression. I think I know, like, for people in my family and for myself sometimes, like, just wanting to shut out the world, like, people say sleep, but sometimes it's like, I can't sleep. It's not like I'm sleeping. I just don't want anybody else around. Like, I just want to be able to just be, and I'm not doing much either. I'm just kind of like, maybe, I might get the dishes done,
Right. And I do see there's a hand raised, but what I want to say, Kathy, is also that I agree with you. I do not feel that that's regression. I feel like it's more a state of overwhelm that we're trying to tolerate. And sometimes it's hard just to kind of take one step forward. So we do need to kind of move back within ourselves in order to regroup in a way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of energy, like, people and places carry energy, right? So even well-meaning people coming over, like, there's a time after the immediate, like, where in my family, it's pretty common, like, we just want to be by ourselves.
Yes.
Like, no offense, but go away.
But in the chat, and I'm sorry, I don't know who said this, but someone said, I feel a need to be with other people. And I feel
wanting to be close. Chandra said being close to people she loves.
Yes.
And then somebody else said Janine said, feeling I need to be someone supporting.
And look, that is such a good point. It does depend on who you've lost, because there are people that we're very attached to. And this all has to do with kind of our social connection, to the people we've lost. So sometimes we hear about someone and we're able to feel a little removed from it. And sometimes there's no feeling of removed at all. And that's a time we really need our community to kind of be there to help us stand. I mean,
yeah, I was just thinking, like, it seems that we're a lot of this is really clear to understand, and Dana has her hand raised so she can speak in a minute, but it's really clear to understand this discussion of grief in relation to the death of someone. But I just know that when you're talking about grief, it can be any kind of loss, right? It doesn't have to be someone died. Right. A breakup, there's grief in a breakup, there's grief in
there's grief in losing a job, there's grief in people moving away from you, there's grief in so much loss of ability. Is there someone who wanted to speak?
Dana has her hand raised.
Yes.
One of the things that I think about when I think about grieving and loss is that, number one, if it's a person, I feel it definitely has to do most often how I respond is what my relationship with that person is like. Did I have a good relationship with them? Was there something left unsaid? Was there something I wish that would have been different? Definitely impacts on how I handle my response to that. But it's the same thing I feel with events. I've shared this with a group before, and I'm in the process of ending a 30-year marriage. And while I definitely mourn the loss of what I had hoped that marriage would be, letting go of what it actually was has been amazingly freeing to me. So while it is a huge loss, I'm actually able to release that part very well and very thankfully that it's over. The loss that I'm having a harder time dealing with is the loss of what I had hoped that relationship would have been. And that part I'm having the harder time letting go of, because that's kind of a core value of mine, is what I had always dreamed and hoped my marriage would be, and what I had hoped. On the flip side, I had my mother-in-law pass away about 5 years ago. We got very, very close in the last year of her life, and I supported her physically and mentally. She moved in with us last year. She had cancer. And when she left the earth, I was at complete peace with her passing. I knew that we were in a good place and I had done everything that I could do for her, and that we had come to a place of peace and understanding between us, which had not been the course of our relationship over many years. And so there's things like that. So it definitely, while there are seasons of grief and kind of coming and going from it, my impact is definitely more on what my relationship to what the item is that I'm grieving and how that impacts me.
I just want to say how much, Dana, I appreciate that comment, because what we don't always acknowledge is that there's a before the event happens or loss or grief, and there's an afterwards. So there's a place you came from. And I think you're really addressing that in a lot of ways, is that we have a relationship to that thing we lost, or a relationship to the person, or a relationship to our hopes and dreams and our expectations that happened before the loss, and then the loss came. So it's not like all loss is the same.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I was really resonating with Dana also, just that we heard about a death in my family in the past week. And in some ways, the death was a blessing for a lot of people because of the way the person had been acting prior to the death. You know, so I don't want to like go into real details, but it wasn't a good situation. He wasn't being a good person. Then you read it can be very confusing, is what I'm saying also, is that then you read the tribute to him or his memorial, and it's like all the highlights and all the great stuff that he accomplished in his life. And there's such a disjuncture, like between the possibilities and the potential that he had and the beautiful parts of him, and then how it was actually working, in life. And sometimes the grief that I have had, some of the hardest, like I won't say hardest, like emotionally, like the most devastating, but the most difficult to integrate is when it's not and can't be resolved. Like they made choices, and then they made choices, and then they made choices, and they made choices, and they got very far down a path that was like, they got really stuck and down a path that was really painful for everyone involved, and then they are gone. And so I don't know what that's called, but
so I want to thank you and Dana, and it moves us into a second topic. I already started the alarm on our next 10 minutes, and the topic is that grief is multidimensional. So what you're both talking about is context. There's a context to everything that happens. So I'm going to just read a few of these words out and then see what you guys think. So first of all, there are circumstances of loss. That's part of what you were talking about, Kathy. But what I'm also talking about is, are we talking about sudden loss? Are we talking about loss that was a long time coming? Are we talking about illness that strikes someone older or younger? What are the circumstances of the loss? That always affects what grief comes out as. And then other ways that grief is multidimensional is that our personality, right? How we are as a person is really brought into the forefront of how we deal with our grief. And how about what you said, Dana, about relationship, about our social situation in that situation, or our feelings of self-worth? It really brings up our vulnerabilities when we're talking about life and death. These are all what we call contextual, and shows how multidimensional grief is. And the last one I want to say is how we deal with grief has a lot to do with our past experience. So if we've had traumatic experiences with loss, then very often things are additive. They add on to each other as we go through our life. Or say we have a loss we haven't resolved yet, and then we have another loss. So there are multiple losses or traumas that we experience. So I'm wondering what people think of this topic, which is that grief is multidimensional, and that, yes, and culture as well. Sorry, I'm reading ahead of you, but our cultures and how we are conditioned to both receive and process, and how death is meaningful. This is the multidimensional aspect.
So Maria said the way we experience and deal with grief is also impacted by our culture. And Dana says always has so much to do with what our experience with loss has been as well, and who showed us how to deal with loss. And there's a bunch of people who are putting things in that are directed only to panelists, and I don't know whether that means that you want me to share them or not. So I'm not going to read anything that's directed only to panelists, because I don't want to betray anyone's privacy. So really make it so that you're addressing all panelists and attendees, which is the second one on the drop-down menu. I think you just kind of like blew my mind, Judith, just in terms of like the multiple dimensions of grief, you know. So I guess, I don't know, like the one that we were talking about, like people are talking now about like experience with grief, experiences with loss, who showed us how to grieve, what does our culture say about how to deal with grief and loss. And then there's also the disenfranchised grief, I guess is what we were calling it before. Like when you've lost something that everybody, it's not socially sanctioned.
Exactly. There's someone with their hand raised.
I don't see a hand. Oh, Janine with her hand raised.
Hello.
Hi, Janine.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on what you were saying, Kathy, and also just talk about that multidimensionality of grief. I had a similar situation with my father before he passed away in 2017. I met my father at the age of 17, and I had about 20 years with him. And we had a very rocky relationship because he just wasn't a very good person. And when he passed away, I found myself grieving the fact that we didn't have a normal, father-daughter relationship. I found myself grieving, saying, hey, I wish I was a daddy's girl, grieving the fact that I couldn't understand him while he was living. But then when he passed away, I saw instances where he tried and I didn't necessarily give him a fair chance, but I was only able to see that in hindsight. So then that brought on another level of grief. So I do identify with the multidimensionality of grief.
Thank you so much, Janine, for sharing.
Yeah, and just thank you so much for that. I think it so clearly talks about that. We're not just grieving for what we think we're grieving for, which may be the person or the relationship. Yes. It's just multiple levels that happen at one time. And it's so important to remember that it's complex. It's not simplistic.
So Judith, I just had a thought, which is like, sometimes you're grieving the future that you won't have.
Yes.
Sometimes you're grieving the present, like that the person's not with you. And sometimes you're grieving the past, because as long as the person is alive, there's a possibility, where there's life, there's hope. There's a possibility of it being transformed. There's a possibility of it getting better. And death feels final to us in this culture, or to many of us in this culture. Death feels very final, at least a huge shift in the parameters of the relationship, So I think that's also part of it. Like, I think I had a favorite aunt who died of complications from alcoholism, and until she died, there was always the hope that she would decide not to, people were offering her olive branches and she would decide to do something different. I think in my divorce also, like what Dana was talking about, the divorce was a final, it's not going to happen. It's not going to change, but before that, there was the hope that, if I just worked a little harder, if we went to therapy, like there's all these things you try to do to make it better. So I guess it's, I'm thinking, I don't know, past, present, and future is another dimension of grief.
Yes. Oh, it is very much another. And that's what that word multidimensional means. It means multiple levels in multiple places of time. It's almost like this big 3D that you need to turn. And it takes time, right? It takes time to break it down, to process it. And that's one of the reasons that we don't just grieve when something happens. We grieve a year later. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, we see a movie on TV and we're crying and we realize we're crying about something that's long past. And just to have an appreciation of yourself when that happens is that this whole process of grieving is complex and lasts for a long time.
And Najma says, thank you for sharing. I also had a similar situation with my dad. I was never, ever to find words to express my thoughts until now. So I think that was to Janine, yes?
Yes,
who spoke about her father. So thank you,
Yeah.
Najma. And then Juliana put something in earlier. She talked about it's not possible to compare grief. A sudden loss of a daughter or younger pet would be different, not worse or better, just different than the loss of someone who's been sick for a while.
Right. And that actually, our little alarm clock is about to go off in 30 seconds, can move us on to the next area, which is that in the grieving process, I mean, we're all human beings. In the grieving process, there are commonalities, ways that we're very similar, and there are ways we're very unique. And part of what makes grief so complex is that it's paradoxical. In other words, we sit in that at the same time. I should be doing this. I'm the same as everyone around me, but also I'm different. I'm different in a number of different ways. So I'm wondering if anyone can address or wants to talk about the fact that they've had a unique response to grief, or even what's common, what they feel brings them closer to other people, knowing there's similarity.
So Sandra has her hand raised.
Yep.
It might have been from the last conversation.
That's okay.
I can unmute Sandra, but she had her hand raised previously.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you can go on. I don't want to.
No need to go on. No need.
Sandra, it's okay.
Okay, well, I think similar to what I'm gonna say, probably something what you just was saying. It was a question. My mom passed away in February, and I have had so many deaths and losses in my family, just numerous. But my question is because my mom was sick for years, my grief was more when she was sick. And because I'm in church and Bible, and the word said, cry when they born and rejoice when they die. And I said, Lord, that seemed backwards to us. But when my mom passed away, of course, I grieved that day, but I'm more at peace with it now. But my grieving was more so when she was alive and sick. Do that make sense? Or
that makes total sense. So there's a word for that. It doesn't matter, but there's a word for it, and it's called anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
That we grieve ahead of time. And actually, Sandra, I'm very much in that boat. I do, I'll just find myself crying and someone isn't even passed yet. And then once it happens, I kind of feel a little, and then I'm really okay. So I'm in the same boat. Not the same. I have a similar process.
Right.
So we've got another hand raised. Oh, Sandra, do you want to continue? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just asking, was that because just to rejoice, that's what's on the spiritual level, being around so many people still grieving. I'm more understanding what God is saying, because not rejoice that my mom is gone, of course, but rejoice that she's not suffering. And it's so much of God, I'm feeling okay. So is that okay? Yeah.
That is absolutely okay. It actually, Sandra, it actually does fit into what we're talking about.
Right.
There are things common among us, but we're very unique. That's your unique process. And that's what grief is. It's what happens to you alone.
Right. Okay.
Well, and I think I just, as a student of Judith's, one of the things I most appreciate about all of the thread that runs through the grief and the trauma and the loss things that you've done with us, Judith, is that it's all okay. There is no wrong. There is no wrong way to grieve. There is no wrong way. I mean, I guess if you were hurting other people, that might be an exception. But in general, like, yeah, it's all okay. And what's really important, is to be mindful and to be aware and to be with yourself as you're going through it, and not to judge yourself negatively, putting more stress on yourself in an already difficult time.
Right.
So Joy had her hand raised.
Okay, hi. So for me, when my mother passed away, and it was a sudden kind of situation. And so what I found the most difficult was the expectations of other people on what they sort of expected me to do or not do. And because of the situation that it was, I had this long list of things that I had to do. And I said earlier, for me, it was a time when I just made myself be busy because I really didn't have a choice. So it didn't allow me to truly like let go of it until like years later, because I had to take in my disabled brother. I had to move my family from across the country to another state. I had to enroll my children in a new place with new people that we didn't know. It was just, and then of course all the stuff that goes with when someone passes in terms of just the paperwork. So I feel like, I don't know, the way that some of my siblings and other relatives were looking at me were like, you know, why aren't you falling apart? And I felt like it's in there, but I don't have the luxury of falling apart, because I need to like take care of this stuff. Like I didn't, and so I feel like I really didn't have opportunity to just stop, like just live in it. You know, I was really close to my mom, but till much later, like a lot of time, you know, and so because my life continued with all of those new added responsibilities, I was just really super busy for a really long time. And until that sort of slowed down, I'm not even really sure what allowed me to have some time to really live in that grief for some moments and really sort of celebrate the relationship that I had with my mom, because I felt like I didn't have time.
You know, Joy, tomorrow we're going to be talking more about styles of grieving. It sounds like, you know, necessity dictated to you. I mean, that's what it sounds like. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there are people who grieve by doing things. They're called instrumental grievers. And what research has shown is that people who are instrumental grieving, so for them, grieving would mean, I'm going to put together this service for my mother. I'm going to take care of these children who came from here. I'm going to do this. But what research has shown that instrumental grievers have the same positive outcomes as people who grieve by being expressive or emotional. It's just a different style of grieving. But it may not, what happens is exactly what you said. People's expectations tell us we should be doing something other than what's in our heart or what's natural for us or what we have to do, right?
Yep.
That's what Tandra says. The expectations of others can be exhausting. I'm learning that it's not easy learning how to give ourselves the permission to feel what we're feeling without judgment, internal and external. And Maria says, grief is truly a unique process. Give yourself grace and grieve in your own time and space. And Michelle has her hand raised. Michelle, you need to unmute. Yeah, good.
Hi, okay. I just wanted to comment to what I think, was it just Joy that was talking?
Yes.
My mom passed away in May, and so I had I had a thought before Joy spoke, but then when she passed away and we had to do all the planning, and it was just very much busy and doing. And I thought about my mom handled things in a similar way, and she would say, you know, whatever crisis is occurring at the moment, you just kind of push through and you get done what has to get done, and you kind of fall apart later if you're going to fall apart. But yeah, and I think a lot of people, for some reason, I'm not usually, I think, the person necessarily to step up and do things, but I feel like a lot of stuff fell on my shoulders, and I, like, people just expected me to do it, and I feel like I stepped up. It was an awakening for me, going, wow, I really, you know, I stepped up and I did stuff, and I was like very mature and adult. Like, I'm older, I don't feel adult, but I'm an adult. But so that was just a piece of me that came out that actually reminded me of my mom at the time. But then, like you don't feel, you don't do, you don't experience, and people are like, are you okay? And then once in a while I start to cry, and then people go, oh, you're not okay. Like, I guess they thought I was fine because I was just pushing through. And then also she had ALS, so even after she passed and people are talking to me about it, and I said, I feel like I lost her twice, you know, because at one point she lost her speech, she lost things. So it's like I couldn't call her on the phone. I couldn't have that same relationship with her. And then, like, towards the end, we were all over there caring for her and like helping her with things she needed help with. But it's like for the last year and a half, it's like she's gradually progressing in her disease. And then, so I've had lots of emotional times, like in the shower and like throughout the past year. It's like at different moments, it's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? But I realized, you know, just like a couple of weeks ago, somebody said something to me, and I said, I realized I feel like I lost her twice, because I lost the relationship I had with her before. It was very different as she was declining. And then when she passed, and everybody said it was better because when she passed, obviously she's, you know, not suffering anymore, like someone else mentioned about illness. And so she's kind of in a better place, but we're just the ones missing her. But we appreciate, you know, we realize, oh, she would appreciate this, she would appreciate that. So yeah. Lots of
Michelle, it sounds like you had that you had like multiple moments of loss in that process. And, you know, here's a good question. Like, how do you know that, you know, Kathy's saying, you know, there is no wrong way, or no, but how do you know that there may be a problem? I wonder if any of you, because it's not all smooth sailing for all of us, right? When we go to mourn, it's a very difficult process. I myself, I always picture it like going through this ring of fire. Like, there's nowhere to go but through the ring of fire. You have to walk through it. That's what it's like for me anyway. Very difficult process. But sometimes, well, I'm going to open that up. Like, how do you know there is a problem when you're?
So what I'm thinking, Judith, is when you talked about the ring of fire, like, it's almost like, how do you know when you're getting burned?
Yeah.
You know, past the point of like, you're not going through, like you're stuck in it and it's damaging you. Because I think that for me, that's always the fear with intense negative emotions is, I mean, before a lot of therapy, like, this negative emotion is going to kill me. Like, I can't survive feeling this amount of sadness or this amount of disappointment or this amount of pain. And so I think, well, how do you know when it's not just grieving, it's also, you know, it's dangerous for you, right?
Right. It's a good question. I wonder. Yeah.
And Yvette has been talking about losing her son tragically. And she says the acceptance and gratitude for, and some of it I haven't been reading because it was to panelists, not to panelists and attendees, and I didn't know. But now she says the acceptance and gratitude for the time we had life lived, even though it was short, is what helped me through the loss of my son. It was sudden and unexpected for a 20-year-old who had a brand new baby girl and my youngest son. I had to stay in a grateful place or I would have fallen apart. My faith in God and good friends who did show they care were all huge instruments. Even family had to separate for a time because it was such a tragedy. Friends were priceless. Maria's sending a lot of love out to everybody. And
thank you, Maria. Feel that coming from you. You know, the thing is that although I definitely advocate people taking things in their own, like getting to know their own process, proceeding at a pace that is comfortable for them and meaningful for them, there are times when we don't have the support we need. There are times when we don't have the outlet for conversation. You know, there are times when, you know, we think we should be doing something else, or we get a little bit of trauma, you know, where we have nightmares and fears. And those are the times it's really important to reach out to other people. There is such a thing as a grief counselor. There is such a thing as, you know, there's a new thing called a death doula, which helps bring us through processes of death. And sometimes you just need the space to hear your own voice, whether it's a good friend or a bereavement group or a significant other or a tree. Kathy knows I talk to trees, so I'm teasing her there. But, you know, I mean, sometimes it's important to express and to be heard and to realize that when the grief hits you, whether it's right away or it's a delayed reaction or it's years down, we have to make some space for it. We have to make some space for it so that we can go forward.
so Janine says, for me, I know it's too much when my body begins to respond. I never get headaches regularly. So when I get a headache, most often it's a symptom of stress. And then Joy says, when movement forward stops, then she feels grief can be detrimental when you're unable to do the things you need to do to continue living. Yeah, and I with that one, Joy, I also like, there have been times in my life when grief had caught me in its tracks, in my tracks, and I was not able to continue doing the things that I needed to do. But that didn't mean I would never be able to do them. Like, and it didn't mean it wasn't an emergency. I just needed to attend to the grief, you know. Do you see what I'm saying, Judith? Like if you, I guess I'll ask it as a question. Can it be a natural part of a grieving process to be unable to function in ordinary life?
Yes, that's when, who said, that's when if your body isn't going to stop you, your will to live is going to stop you, or you just feel like you cannot go on any further. That's when it's like grief is like a little child standing in front of you, crying and reaching its arms to you, like, pay attention to me, take care of me. Grief can be just like that. And those are the times, and I've seen it many, many times when people cannot, that's it. They've done as much as they can do. They've gone back to work for as many days as they can. They've taken care of as many other people as they can take care of. And now their whole system is like, stop, wait. And of course, we don't want to have to get to that point, because those points are very often not very convenient, right? I mean, what are we supposed to say to our boss? What are we supposed to say to our children? What do we, you know, when everything within us needs to stop? And that's why it's so important to take care of grief, if we can, when it's happening, in even the small ways, but it does happen. Grief needs to be attended to.
So May has a question, and she says, what are the first steps to deal with grief?
I'm very interested what other people have to say as well, but I always think that the first step of anything is awareness. Does that make sense to people? The first step is we have to open ourselves to our own experience by saying, I feel this. It's just a conversation you're having to yourself, right? So just the beginning of your own awareness, yes, owning it, hearing it, making space for it to be. Like the people, when we first started this conversation, people were talking about being angry. Well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. We need to give ourselves space to feel the anger, because you can't chase anger away. You know, you just can't chase it away. It'll come back.
I think one of the first steps, given this, is to set aside some time and space, safe space, whether that's with another person or whether that's by yourself, to actually feel what you feel, acknowledge, etc. Because not all contexts are appropriate for that, you know?
Right, right. But I like your idea about setting aside, like it can be a cup of tea, like I need to have my cup of tea right now, or taking a walk, or if there's a friend who's particularly good at listening to you, you know, making time, giving yourself permission to have that conversation with someone who's caring. I think the first step is to just, like you said, someone said, own it, but be honest. And it sometimes, by the way, what we feel is numb, and it's okay to just say that too. You know what? I don't feel anything, and I feel like I should be feeling it. But you know, sometimes, go ahead.
Dana says she feels like she has unresolved grief for many instances over the last 40 years, and journaling about many things has brought awareness to me in the last few years. And May says, say I hurt. The journaling thing, that opens up a whole nother door, Judith, for me, because sometimes it's not about words, and it's not about, you know, listening and talking, and sometimes it can be writing or drawing or dancing
or music.
Yeah, or music, like, or crying to music, you know. So that might be another thing that, you know, in terms of what you do in that space, like just letting it out of your body, you know, like doing whatever you feel your body needs to do could be a way of dealing with grief. That's not, we kind of think everything has to be processed intellectually, and I don't know if that's true. Like,
I agree so much.
I don't know if it's about getting the story right as much as it's about just letting it flow through you.
You know, I can laugh about this now, but you know, during the pandemic, we all worked so hard on each other's behalf, you know, to hold each other up and whatnot. And so one day, no one was home at my house, and I was watching TV, and I don't know, it was like a medical show, but and this was, you know, only recently, so a lot of the pandemic had gone on, lockdown had already happened, and in this medical show, it was a drama. You know, it was showing the exhaustion of some of the nurses and the doctors. And it took me so much by surprise. No one was home. I cried so hard. So sometimes it is watching a drama that helps us see ourselves, you know, or we relate to those feelings, or a commercial. How many people have cried at commercials? It's just waiting to kind of come out of us. And we do feel better a little bit afterwards when we can let some of it go. Not that it's easy, I'm not saying that, but that it takes its time.
And Janan, they have been, I think she has been typing a lot. I think maybe it's all to panelists, so I haven't been reading it, but she brought up that to cope herself, she reads the Quran for a while. And I feel like other people are talking about how their religion and their religious community, or their religion, or their faith, or their beliefs, or the holy books, you know, wisdom from others across the ages can be a good way of dealing too. And then Yvette says, finding a book that relates to your pain is sometimes helpful. It was for me, because there may not be anyone who relates or truly understands, no one seems to get how it affects us physically. And I know I'm scrolling back up. Yvette, because I think that there was a book that you recommended.
Oh, Tears, I wrote it down, Tear Soup.
Tear Soup.
That one, Tear, I've never heard of it, but I'm gonna look it up, Tear Soup, thank you. You know, Kathy, I wanted to take just 2 minutes because we're at the end of today. We're gonna be here all week through Thursday, not Friday. And I just wanted to do a really, really quick recap. So we started out by talking about the emotions we've all experienced, laughter and joy, needing more sleep, being lonely or tired or overwhelmed, having to make intentional choices to get through the day, and the shock sometimes, or just disappointment, feeling disappointment. We talked about regression and oscillation. So feeling like we're going backwards, but also feeling like we're bouncing up and down, and how those are also parts of the process. And then we talked about kind of the multidimensional aspects, our culture, our religion. What happened before the loss? The loss didn't start our world. So what happened before changed a lot, our past experiences and the quality of the relationship, so that there were multiple levels of grief. And then we talked about what was common and unique, in that there really is no wrong way. I mean, that's the truth. But that expectations can be something we bump up against when we're dealing with other people. So we ended by talking about how do we know when we really need to give ourselves more time. And one of our topics is going to be self-care. So I think we're going to be able to come back to that.
Thank you so much, Judith. This was fabulous and very meaningful and intense, and looking forward to tomorrow, when it's going to be about styles of grieving, and then grief and self-care, and then watching others grieve. And then on Friday, there's a Grief Compass Cafe. If you'd like to join us, we'll be using the new deck, debuting the new deck of questions. So, and this is the booster pack that is available. And as I said, Judith and Ahmad were both architects of it, and Yoli and Ale, who's going to be here next week. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you, Yvette. Thank you, Janan. It was wonderful to share this time with you. Thank you, May. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Maria. Good to see you after all this time. Hi, Kathleen. Thank you, Luan.